He says Senzo Tanaka is his Shidoshi.
So obviously in the movie, Senzo Tanaka gets all the credit for the Kumite, and you want to honor him, at least in the movie.
The Kumite? Yes.
How much
Right.
credit do you give him for developing your martial arts skills to win all these matches? Hey guys, in today's video, it's all about Senzo Tanaka. Okay, so there's actually evidence the guy was actually really around Frank Dux during that time. And the question is though, did he really train Frank Dux? And if so, how much credit does he deserve for Frank Dux' Kumite fight? You know, you talked about some of the masters you trained with and taught you.
Shidoshi Tanaka trained me.
I gotta bring up Senzo Tanaka.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, so there's so many stories out there, right? Of I guess he lived in your neighborhood more or less.
Well, he lived in my neighborhood. Well, he had a place in my neighborhood. He lived up in many places. He had multiple families. He was a real ninja. That's all I'm going to say. The guy, he did many things, and there's a record to prove it. That's all I'm going to say at this point.
Okay? You have pictures of him too, don't you?
Yes, I don't have it actually. The person that has all that stuff was Adam McKinley, and this is what's so funny about it. Adam McKinley went looking into me because and his wife is the due diligence expert for the UN, so she has access to the databases and the archives that normal people can't access, and she was able to get, his pictures, all these things. But here's the interesting thing: at the same time, it's not that hard to get, because you can go on ancestry.com and you can look up Senzo Tanaka and you'll see his picture.
Oh, his picture is actually on ancestry.com.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff that she got was more along the lines of how does a guy 53 years old end up in the U.S. Army at the height of World War II and is operating out of Hawaii? Okay. Kind of raises some questions there, And then you do some more digging and you find out Senzo Tanaka is a graduate of the Nakano Spy School. So
real quick though, Frank. No, I mean, there's evidence there. I even told people in the comment section, you kind of got to give that one to Frank, because I don't know if it was the LA Times or other whatever saying, oh, there's no Senzo Tanaka, and then all of a sudden it's well, actually there was, So we kind of got to give that to Frank.
Okay, Frank, you win.
But how did you meet him anyway?
Well, let me say one thing first.
Yeah.
Okay. The LA Times never said he didn't exist. They said they couldn't find proof of his existence.
Okay, they couldn't.
And if you read the article very carefully, and it's not an article, it's an editorial. And in editorial, you have editorial license, and you can twist things any way you want to. Okay, that's important to understand. People say, "Oh, it was proven by the LA Times." No, it's not. Guy gave an editorial. It was shoved in the back part of the magazine in a little San Fernando Valley section. That was it. It was the internet that made it a big thing. Otherwise, nobody even thought about it or even gave it any attention. Even journalists would look at it and go, this is not a real article.
Oh, okay. So the internet just blew it out of proportion, basically, as it does most things.
Well, especially at the beginning of the internet when nobody knew anything, right? And everybody accepted everything on the internet as being true,
Yeah.
So that hurdle had to be overcome. But yeah, it never said that. He said that the LA Times said that they could find no proof of his existence, which I found odd. And it was pointed out to me by Adam, that at the same time when he said this, the same LA Times was publishing a list of all the victims of the Japanese internment camps in America, and Senzo Tanaka's name is there. So they're speaking out two sides of their mouth. You understand what?
How did you actually meet him, though? You didn't try to steal his sword like in the movie, right?
I wasn't going to steal it.
Well, I met him through. It's a long story, but basically, he came and saw me participate in a jiu-jitsu tournament.
You have fighting spirit.
Okay.
And this is after this is after I'd gone to see the Black Dragons in Chicago, and there's a story behind that too. But essentially, I was invited to train with him and his nephews at that time, and so I did. That was basically it. As a favor to other members of the Black Dragon Society who were trained by Senzo Tanaka. John Keane was trained by him, Lawrence Day, Michael Felkoff, Ernie Reynolds. I'm trying to think of some other names right now offhand, but I can't, I think Dick Moore ran into him a couple times. I'm not sure, but on that one. But yeah, they were trained by him. He's the reason that Keane, basically called his group the Black Dragon Fighting Society, because Tanaka was a Black Dragon. His buddy was Major Takai. He was a Japanese major who was arrested in Chicago as a Black Dragon for spying during World War II and was put into custody in 1943. And some people think that Tanaka was actually a double agent, and actually that's how they knew he was an agent.
Interesting.
And that's why they're very quiet. It's very quiet about that, because of those aspects.
Let me ask you this, Frank. So obviously in the movie, Senzo Tanaka gets all the credit for the Kumite, and you want to honor him, at least in the movie. How much credit do you give him for developing your martial arts skills to win all these matches?
Tanaka was brilliant at teaching me the nuances of martial arts. There's certain nuances, like on how you do leverages, what you do, certain strikes. He gave me the tools to go fishing. In other words, it's sort of like, if I give you fish, you eat for a day, but if I teach you how to fish, you eat for a lifetime. And he basically taught me how to fish. That's the best way to put it.
Okay.
Because every man, and I believe this, and this is why you see it in my systems and my students, every person in my system has their own logo within the triangle. They have their own spirit animal. And that's because you are your own system. No man controls a system. Not really. No one owns body biomechanics. There's only so many correct ways you can throw a punch or a kick. Okay. And it's limited by your body biomechanics. That's a simple truth. Now, some styles have discovered one way of doing it. Others have discovered another way to do it. Some emphasize doing it one way. Some emphasize doing another. But ultimately, when the moment of truth comes, it's going to come down to you as a human being and your personal experiences, skill sets, and etymology that will determine the outcome.
I do really like
it becomes your style.
I do really like the philosophy behind your system, Duke's Brew. And I've often told people, because they'll ask me like, oh, is this the right way to throw a kick? I'm like, well, you can't really frame the question like that. Like, I think there are better ways personally to throw a kick, but it's not necessarily a right way, as in like, you must do this kick this way. It's like, no, you're thinking about it too simply,
And that has to do with ego. A lot of masters wanted their students to emulate them, so they were immortalized. Okay? That's what it really comes down to, because we're all built differently. You cannot throw the kick at its optimal performance the way I do. You can mimic it, you can do whatever you want, but there's always going to be a slight tweak in it for you to make it your own and better. And that's really important that people understand that. And this is where people, I think, get lost, and they don't come to the performance standards of like myself or others in my system, because they are so regimented and so limited in their thinking. They become stunted, and they are their own worst enemy. They prevent themselves from using what it is that works for them to their advantage.
I 100% agree with you. I mean, I've even gone as far as saying, in a lot of styles, I really feel like the black belt is the beginning. The black belt is like the real white belt, because that's when you could kind of like really go on and make it your own after you know how to do everything. Like any artist, if you're painting, for example, the mixing of colors, the different brush strokes. Okay, once you learn all that and you understand it and you know it, then you could start creating real artwork and making it your own. So I think it is important to go through that's a system, but then, you know, you can't be stuck in that system necessarily, or at least you shouldn't.
Well, black belt just basically is a tool for other instructors to know that you've got a certain foundational level of skill.
Yeah,
And
sure.
there was no belts. Let's be realistic, okay? It wasn't until the martial arts entered a sport phase that you saw belts.
And the
Colored
business
belts
phase.
are actually come from the different colored hats that bureaucrats used to wear in Japan. Okay, they needed a way when they were competing to make sure that people were competing. You're pitting equal skilled people against each other. You don't want to put a beginner against a guy who's been there like for 5 years, who's can drive nails into a wood desk just using his fist. I mean, it's not going to be a learning experience.
It's not gonna be so fun for the other
either
guy.
one, any one of them, right? So the reality is that's how that came about. And Jigoro Kono was the one who instituted that. And it was really originally only 5 degrees. That was it. But then later on, to other people wanting to go beyond that, it's grown to 10 degrees. That became the acceptable standard. And then when it became more commercialized, the martial arts became a real rabid commercial dog. Now you see 15 degrees of black belt today. Why? For me, it's real simple. It goes by your role, and that's why in FAST we just have different levels. Either you're an instructor or you're a student. You have a competency level of an A, B, C, or D level. That's where your competency level is, and you just move along that. Or what's your evolution? And I like to use the term evolution as opposed to even belt level. This is the evolution this person's in their training and where they're at. And we might do that with a different colored shirt if we're having classes. That's about it.
Oh, real quick though, Frank, though.
Cool. Yeah.
So in Fast Duke's Brew, like you guys not have different color belts to denote?
Yeah, we do. We still have the belt.
Okay.
Yes, and we still have degrees, and that's because we use that for testing. We use that for quality control purposes. And I tell people, get out of your head whether, you deserve a belt because of you've got 10 years in the system. It's like, no, what is your level of competency? This is an insurance device for me. So I don't get you or try to get you to do something that you're not going to be able to do.
Sure.
And get injured doing.
That makes sense. Hey, let's move on and dive deep into blood sport.